You're listening to a podcast from the South China Morning Post.
Hello and welcome to the US-China Trade War podcast. My name's Finbar Birmingham on the political economy desk at the South China Morning Post. But today I'm joining you from my home office in my pretty small apartment in the Tin Hau neighbourhood of Hong Kong. This, for us, is an experiment in podcasting after the number of imported coronavirus cases spiked this week. Many here worry that we are on the cusp of a second wave of infections. The last time we went into this sort of mode, me and my podcast producer, Jared, we recorded in my place or in his place, but this time it's all remote. So please do excuse any sound issues, but the show must go on. I'll be joined via Zoom, a tool which you all must be familiar with by now, by the political economy editor, John Carter, to discuss the political ramifications of what has been a week from hell for the global economy. As the ship sinks, the US and China are engaging in a high-stakes blame game, and we will get John's view on that. Next, I will be joined by Alicia Garrero-Herrero, who is the Chief Asia-Pacific Economist at Natixis here in Hong Kong. Now, I will warn you, this was pre-recorded this morning, Friday the 20th of March, and my head is still spinning. Alicia's analysis of where the Chinese and global economies are right now is absolutely electrifying, and her critique of the US-China posturing is excoriating. So much so that I forgot to introduce her, so we'll just go straight from John to Alicia, and I will see you on the other side. Enjoy. I am joined on Zoom by John Carter, who is elsewhere in Hong Kong, somewhere in Wan Chai, I believe. Hello, John.
Hello.
How is life in lockdown?
Constrained,
Yeah.
but acceptable.
Okay.
We're moving ahead.
Good. I hope you're right. Well, what a week we've had. Various. Every time I speak to someone, the term war footing comes up, which is not really what you want to hear when you're interviewing bank analysts and economists, usually quite conservative people. Give us a snapshot, John, of the key highlights of what has happened to the Chinese and the global economy this week. And I know that there are hundreds of things you could say, but just what are your main takeaways from this?
Well, from the Chinese side, they are gradually getting their industrial capacity back up to normal. They haven't reached it yet. They're somewhere, depending on the size of the company, somewhere between 70 and 90% there. It looks like sometime in April they will be back up to normal in terms of their ability to produce. And this is a good thing. It means that migrant workers can gradually come back to work, but there are still restrictions on movement. There are still restrictions on opening your factory. Workers have to be tested, things of that nature. And this is making the process more deliberate, more gradual than they probably would like. But that, on the one hand, you have to contain the virus. On the other hand, you want to limit the economic damage that the virus is doing. So that's China. And so there's the supply side of the Chinese economy is coming back online. The problem that we're facing, and the problem we're facing worldwide now, is one of demand. First, in China, consumer spending is the largest portion of the economy, but consumers have not been spending because they haven't been able to leave their house for the most part. But surveys show that they will continue to be hesitant to spend even after the virus has passed because of their worries about the future. What does the virus outbreak and the way it was handled mean about their future? China's healthcare system is still fairly rudimentary, so they want to save something for that, among other things. And so you will see a return to daily necessity buying, but the big ticket items like buying a car or buying home appliances, that's likely to lag and may lag very badly. And this is a problem for Chinese economies going forward. That's domestic demand, the willingness of people in China to spend money. Foreign demand is looking even worse. You've got the absolutely rapidly deteriorating situation in the States which means the demand for Chinese exports won't be there. You may have seen yesterday, day before, 100 U.S. automobile factories have shut down at least through the end of the month. Those automobile factories use a lot of things made in China, and they won't be ordering those things during that downtime. And that is going to have a dramatic effect on those manufacturers in China who make those things going forward. Same with non-virus related products in the United States. You're not going to go out to Walmart and buy things because you're worried about the future. You're worried about your job. You're worried about your income. So it puts a damper on everything. And it's, at least in Europe and the United States, they haven't reached peak virus yet. They're still getting worse. And it may be weeks, and hopefully not, but it could be months before they reach peak virus.
And what a horrible snapshot that is. But John, look, how many years have you been covering economics as a journalist? And have you ever seen anything like this?
I go back to the Carter administration. So we're talking 42 years ago.
Just to be clear, that's Jimmy Carter, not John Carter.
And he's not a relative. No, I've never seen anything like this. I mean, the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009 is the only comparable event. And that was very specific, related to certain types of loans in America. It was easy to grasp the fundamental problem and to propose solutions to it. I mean, it was a horrible thing, and it took a long time for the solutions to get the world economy out of the mire that it was in. But the problem with this crisis is you don't know how bad it's going to get and how long it's going to last. It's a complete unknown, and that makes it much worse. And certain economic conditions that are in existence now make it unlikely we will get out of it as quickly as we did the global financial crisis.
The effects of which we are still seeing, in various political machinations around the world. So even though you're talking about getting out of the global financial crisis in a relatively short space of time, people still talked about that last year, the hangovers of the GFC and so on. So it's that really puts it in perspective. This is an absolutely massive event, and I've spent the week speaking to people who really do not know what to say about it. Analysts who cannot update their financial models quickly enough. They can't keep up with the headlines. People who have basically given up on making any concrete assertions. It really is quite extraordinary. And I think one of the key things we'd remember in the future, John, is that as the ship went down, the United States and China have spent the time bickering rather than trying to come together and come to some sort of solution that might help the global economy.
Well, let me make one comment before I answer that question, and that is, did you note that today that London closed the tube, just as they did during wartime? This is a war-like situation, and that you have to look at it from that perspective.
Sure.
But to go to the U.S. and China, this is, well, it's beyond stupid. Let's backtrack. In 2008 and 2009, one of the things that got the world out of the recession it was in was that China cooperated with the rest of the world and instituted this massive stimulus program, 4 trillion yuan. And that dragged the economy out of the recession it was in. China accounted for 60% of the growth over the next decade. Now, China is not showing any willingness to take on that kind of massive stimulus because of the hangover effects from what they did before. But so the bickering between the United States and China makes that worse. Each of them calling each other names, throwing their journalists out and things of that nature. We have a big meeting next week of the Group of 20. Group of 20 is 20 of the largest economies in the world. And in 2008, because China was not a member of the economic clubs, the G7 of the biggest Western nations, they upgraded the G20 into a forum where China could participate so that China could be part of the global solution of the problem at that time. So we've got a G20 meeting next week. It will be held by conference call because of virus concerns, but they will talk. And one of the big questions is, will China participate in the solutions, both virus containment and solving the economic problems that the world confronts? I think it's fair to say that they will be very happy to help with virus containment. Mm-hmm. Whether they help with the economic damage is another question again. And the bickering between the leaders or officials of the two largest countries, it just makes this harder.
Yeah.
You don't need any extra problems at this point. You want to eliminate as many problems as you can and move forward. And it's not clear that that's happening at this time. And a good example is Trump keeps calling it the China virus, and Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, calls it the Wuhan virus. There's a blame game going on, and they're trying to make it seem like China is completely to blame for what's happening in the world, despite clear evidence that both in Europe and the United States didn't do enough soon enough. I mean, they had China's example to look to, mm-hmm. and they didn't take the obvious steps to prevent the contagion of the virus to their areas, their regions. So we'll have to wait and see how the G7 turns out. But the mood music at this point is not good.
Not at all. It's actually a worrying time. I mean, as journalists, we're obviously seeing these updates live, and we're reporting from our sources. And I wonder what it was like, John, when you came out from covering the financial crisis and you came out the other side. Does this remind you of working as a journalist back in like 07, 08, 09? Just the speed of the developments and the fallout and how quickly it happens?
Well, indeed. And obviously the demise of Lehman Brothers on September 15th of 2008 was the key event. That was the atomic bomb, if you will. And everything flowed from that. And the response was, there was something new every hour on the hour. And it was very difficult to cover it and very difficult to make sense of it all. And in what was clear at that point, and I think it's clear now, is that officials were guessing. They didn't know. They didn't understand the depth of the problem. They didn't know whether the solutions they were proposing would actually solve it. And so they were, at least in some cases, and the Chinese and the Americans for sure, were going all in to try to make sure that they were doing enough to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. That's not yet happening here. The United States is starting that process. Europeans are still bickering over fiscal support, and China is, it's not that they're not doing anything, but they're not doing anything close to what they did before.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting, John. Thanks very much for taking the time to log on to our Zoom chat today. All right, cheers. Thank you very much.
Take care now.
And how have you found the working from home?
I'm fine. I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you have 4 kids, every time you are in kind of, leave of absence for whatever reason, you're pregnant, you always work from home. So, I think women are okay with this. I'm telling you, because in my office, I see guys, even if they have to be home, like they're still hanging around. Like you see, it's like, I feel they can't be home kind of idea. Anyway, whatever.
But Alicia, look, it feels like a million years ago now. Monday's data on the Chinese economy, all the metrics completely fell off a cliff. All-time lows for industrial production, retail sales, and asset investment. And I think you tweeted me just after the data came out, and you said that we shouldn't be surprised by these numbers because they were all visible in the purchasing managers' indices, which came out a month earlier, or a few weeks earlier.
Yes.
But I think why I was surprised was because the government had been so brutally honest with the numbers, and they had released what look, at least to us, to be the real figures. What was your thinking behind the government's decision to not try and cover this up and to just be open and upfront about it?
Whether it was you or somebody else from South China Morning Post who called me, I kind of summarized the whole thing into this coordination by threat. And I will explain the point is that I actually think China is trying very hard since, I guess whenever you lift something before others, you become very, you tend to preach, but you don't want to preach, but you want to. So basically, I think China was preaching or was voicing out what the global economy would go through and why policies would have to be taken preemptively, although probably we weren't still, we didn't manage to do it as preemptively, but you could argue that others are. You think that how many Asian economies are reacting in terms of packages, Indonesia and so on, compared to the cases they have. It's like, it looks like crazy, but I think that was China's message. Look, these are the numbers you're going to go through. So if you want to avoid the depression, which by the way will hurt me too, meaning it's not for free that they're preaching, look at this, because it was brutal. And frankly speaking, I think so it's threat, coordination by threat, meaning look at me, you'd better do something. The other thing I think is quite important is that that data came at the time of what I would call the sweet spot for China, which is now disappearing. And the sweet spot to me is this idea that you're getting in trouble and I'm getting fined. So we're like moving in different directions. I'm getting out of the boat, you're still there. It's kind of, and I think that was a sweet spot because everybody was focusing on cases and, all of these numbers we'll look at. So in a way, okay, even if the economy is collapsing, you're out. But the problem is that by giving that strong message that, and then lots of things were published that they're up to 90% capacity and so on. But now, as we speak, people are starting to say, yes, maybe because you want to keep employment. And you heard Li Keqiang, it's a very, very obvious message that, growth, we don't care now. I think they're even delaying this meeting, because they don't want to set any growth targets, in my opinion. They want to say, this economy of war is not us, it's the world, we're out, but now we're being hammered, either by imported cases on the sanitary side or by falling, if not basically vanishing external demand. And then, all of what's happening in financial markets, the Fed needs to act swiftly on swap lines. Not only are my importing cases, as I said, you're creating a problem back to me. So now I need to focus on stabilize employment, basically economy of war. Not for me, not because of me, but because of you guys. So in that regard, I think two things. Coordination by threat, but also use that sweet spot to show that leveling off, I'm out. But now I think the message might be changing as to showing stability. Probably they will gear expectations towards a very low GDP number, but not yet. So I don't expect this meeting to take place very soon. And just give these numbers of, employment stability. And now you saw what happened with the renminbi today. I think they're also saying something like, you said it's ages. Well, imagine how many ages since they even agreed on something with the US in terms of phase one deal, like that's really ages. Yeah.
Another lifetime that was, yeah.
Yeah, that was a different China, different world. Who cares? All contracts are being broken around, across the globe. Are you telling me that I need to keep this currency at 7 for the sake of what? Everybody's going.
Yeah.
The dollar is being left alone. We're publishing a report on this today. So, I think that this is basically the idea that I think China is saying, unless you do something, and this could be coordinated intervention, you name it. I'm sorry, I'm following the others. So I think this data is important because of what it means. But I think China now, as we speak, how would I say, they're moving in a phase 3. So phase 1 is horrible data, but bear with me, I'm out. Phase 2 is, I force you to do something, and in fact, it was happy. Phase 3 is not enough, so I need to follow those who, So it's a little bit like they are acknowledging, in my view, like indirectly, that they can't insulate. That's the final thing I wanted to say. They can't insulate from the global economy. I'm sorry. Yeah. You can see that from credit spreads, high yield. Oh my God, they're shooting up. Real estate developers, they've been using the sweet spot as well, because this has happened recently, to buy more land. We have some data on that. I mean, real estate transactions are still very weak compared to last year, which wasn't great either, but compared to that. But they're buying land. I think they thought the stimulus was coming and they could just, but the funding costs now are increasing dramatically. So China is wary of all of this. Economic crisis in the rest of the world, and China, basically showing its strength, maybe okay still, but economic and financial crisis, that's too much. So they're in a different phase now.
Yeah,
in my opinion. Yeah.
We talked at length for months, seemingly now, about the supply shock. What you've just illustrated is the demand shock. Obviously, the demand shock externally is great for the Chinese economy in terms of its impact. It's a huge impact. How much of the domestic demand, Alicia, do you see being lost because of people losing their jobs, bankruptcies at small businesses and employers, people being more prudent with their money? I mean, China is known as the factory of the world, but as we know, it's now more like a consumer economy. They have that's the main engine. So as well as the external demand from the United States, Europe, and the rest of the world, how much of a problem is the internal demand in China as well?
I think it's a huge problem, more than we think it is. And this is why already at the local government level, they are using vouchers, as you know, for consumer durables. I mean, the auto sector is being hammered again after last year. So they are literally at still half of the production. And I don't think it's because they can't produce more. It's that they don't know what the hell to do with the cars. You can produce as much as you want, but if nobody's buying it. In fact, we have some auto producers moving to mass production. So, So I think basically, to your question, I would summarize my answer as follows. This is a shock in levels. This is not like supply is decelerating, demand is decelerating, or no, this is a shock in levels. This is a depression, basically. So everything moves down. What moves down the most? Yeah, it's like levels. So supply, indeed, especially during the first 2 months, plummeted. But, in many sectors, there was still room because there was excess capacity in many, many sectors. So I've always been on the camp that this is, in a way, a demand shock, because it doesn't really matter whether the level of supply comes down, if the level of demand comes down further. And again, this is not growth issues, because they would be negative, but it's all about how much that falls. And the reason why I think the demand in China, not only the rest of the world, will continue to be very weak is that even during SARS, I had a presentation for the community of forecasters in the US yesterday. So lots of people there. I mean, the thing is, even during SARS, where acknowledgedly China was not yet a consumption economy, but the consumption plummeted. The recovery, that pent-up demand we would all be expecting, was so slow, because fear is unbeatable in terms of consumption trends. You're not going to engage in consumption of durables or investment in terms of course, housing and so on, in such an environment for the global economy. It's just impossible. It's like it's the economy of war. We all know. And even if you may be better off than others, you're still going to retrench. So that's on the consumption. But your question is even better. It's about the income growth, because we all know that consumption in China, so retail sales and so on, is been coming down. But generally, income growth was decelerated from 10 to something like 6 or so. But, 6 still fine, yeah? Doing basically in line with GDP. So there wasn't really a restraint, if I may say, of income growth in China. Now, for income growth to continue, they really need to stretch their balance sheets. It's just a different ball game. And that's the key question. Will they do that? And so basically they will save more out of their income, if I may say. So you need to, in a way, to counteract that. You need your income growth to at least be, continue with stable growth. How are you going to do that? Because your GDP, we have something of the order of, in the best of circumstances, 3% end of year, -5% this quarter. So if your GDP grows half what it was growing last year, how can you keep, so basically, in a nutshell, rather than 6% income growth, I would have to see 3%, okay? Just very basic. How can you keep consumption if my income growth, not level, but income growth, it basically gets half of, it's simple. It's very, very hard. Other than vouchers, you need a humongous program, maybe, cut, of course, taxes. And even that, we know that in China, the multiplier is very small because people don't pay taxes. So, you can cut, but the ratio, but we're talking about free in revenue here. So it's very difficult. You need much bigger, in other words, a much bigger cut. And that's not sustainable down the road. So I actually think that we're underestimating, to your question, in a nutshell, the problems with domestic demand. And the only thing left then, literally, is investment, infra investment, things you control well, that can act quickly. That helps a little bit with income growth because, this is, of course, labor intensive. You keep on building stuff. But, it's not great for China. But to be frank, I've been warning about the consequences of this stimulus for debt and so on. Frankly speaking, given what's happening in the world, I repent. You know what I mean? Like, why the hell? Now everybody is there. It's like everybody's China in a way or another. So I don't think that any criticism or, you could do better. How? Now I'm thinking, I think they need to, now priority number one is China grows at least 3%. That's what we are. If not, it's like we're all heading down like at the speed of light. So,
Well, that looks increasingly likely that we're all going down at the speed of light. The final, just very briefly on this, Alicia, how does it make you feel about the possibility of a joined up global effort to tackle the economic fallout of this when you see the rhetoric coming out of Washington and Beijing, where each seems determined to blame the other for the virus's origin and the economic impact?
Yes, this is the most, other than the virus, the second most important risk to the global economy and the world as a whole is this, sorry to say, stupid competition at the wrong time. It might have, maybe we argue it's always stupid, but doing this at this time is like, my God, aren't there any other things to deal with that are more urgent and less structural? Yes, but the thing is, the reason is very simple. The US is, of course, in an election campaign. There's nothing easier than blaming China, frankly. It's the only way, basically, to, I guess, for Trump to make it and win the election. So there's a lot of pressure from that side. So nobody, I guess, can criticize the US, I would say, light attempts to contain the virus before it was too late. If you can demonstrate that the origin of the problem was by somebody else who was even more lenient and aware of how big the problem was. So I guess it's like the plot is very obvious. And for China, I think the plot is obvious too, because even if we see this mantra, no cases in a country of 1.4 billion people, it's like, how the hell can you know? Well, it's just mind-boggling that they keep on I don't know who they have hired as PR consultants, but they should be fired because they are getting into a hole at the wrong time. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you should just, sorry to say, shut up. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, just let it be. No, rather than defend themselves, they attack. It's just so dangerous. But having said that, I think beyond why do it? I think the reason, other than, poor PR, is that they have internal pressure, that people aren't as happy as it seems, from the headlines. And so they have to find a scapegoat. And so so both of them, it's kind of compared to the world, this is a fully coordinated problem. So both have the same objectives. It so happens that they're terribly worrisome for the world. But in a way, they go in the same direction. And I think you're seeing it from the swap lines yesterday from the Fed. Who are they lending to? They're allies. Australia, New Zealand, Sweden. I mean, and Mexico, Brazil, Singapore. I mean, Hong Kong, which was already the case in 2008, but now I thought, my God, I mean, we're sitting on $1 credit market, No, not even water. I mean, Hong Kong has a currency war with the Fed. My God. I mean, 2008, people thought it was a mistake. Now it's like purposely so. And, I worry very much about this because it's like Asia, other than Singapore, is considered, I don't know, like a different, like a different asset class. The Fed doesn't care. I mean, go to the fund. Oh, my God. So it's not only worrisome because, and by the way, finally, Macron told us that they would meet, G7. Everybody waiting on Monday. Nothing. Now, Saudi told us they're meeting, but not much information about it. And people keep on, announcing plans, swap lines, which possibly you could have kept for that meeting to give some substance to it. No. It's like everybody's in its own boat. I help you. I like you. I don't like you. So it's like, the lack of policy coordination at the international level is astounding. People read, and I can't disagree more, all of these rate cuts as a massive coordinated movement. But I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, it's just basically the exact opposite because the Fed is moving. And now, I mean, the proof of the pudding is today's renminbi deval or depreciation. It's not very clear, It's very obvious. It's a race to the bottom, competitive devaluation. That's where we're heading unless these people meet in Saudi, which, in itself, imagine, oh my God, I leave it there, but you know what I mean? Like, what can you expect?
Yeah.
What can you expect? They could expand IMF, so NAB lines and all of that. I mean, they have a lot of things they could do. But, the fact that the Fed, maybe because Australia, frankly, the base was so high, maybe they had to announce this, frankly. I think probably there were some, zombies also in the US money market and so on that pushed them to react very quickly. But my feeling is that, if you really want to, if it's an emergency and if it's a conf call, why the hell do you wait for a week? It's like, you just can't announce it. You just meet and say, we're doing that. Nobody's going to say no to the Fed's liquidity.
Yeah.
It's a very easy meeting.
Yeah. I think this is what an unprecedented situation, Alicia. We're going to have to leave it at that.
Yes, that's fine.
This is this is something we could talk about all day, and I think we should definitely should definitely catch up again in a week or two if the world is still turning. But thank you so much, Alicia. It's been so good to get your thoughts. And
thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the US-China Trade War podcast. Please like, share, subscribe wherever you've been listening. You can follow us on Twitter at SCMP Economy. I am at F Birmingham on there. That's Birmingham with a B-E-R, not like the city. You can get all the updates on what is going on with the coronavirus around the world, but particularly around Greater China on scmp.com. Now, many of you will be in quarantine, will be in lockdown, will be in isolation. Please take a moment to phone your loved ones. It really does help. Take it from someone who has been doing this for a couple of months in Hong Kong. Wash your hands, keep your social distancing, and stay healthy. And we will see you next week.
For more podcasts from the South China Morning Post, head to scmp.com, where you can hear more about technology, trade, culture, and society.